South Africa's mining industry has been thrown some tailwinds in the recent while. Higher commodity prices have sweetened profits. And last week, the president increased the threshold for electricity self-generation for companies to 100 megawatts. The proof of the good environment for the mining industry was seen in the first quarter GDP numbers, with mining being one of the biggest drivers for economic growth. Joining me for that conversation on the mining landscape is South Africa's Neal Froneman, the CEO at Sibanye-Stillwater. Neal, good to speak with you after a long time. Just let's start off with that latest announcement regarding self-energy generation, because you have been quite vocal of South Africa's previously sluggish pace towards carbon neutrality back when the threshold for self-generation was a lot lower than the recent announcement. Just your view on what was announced recently and what this does to our pace of carbon neutrality compared with our global partners, of course.
Yes, certainly, and nice to talk to you again, Fifi. Listen, this was a good news announcement, and as you quite rightly said, for the last few years, we have, through the Minerals Council and I suppose individually, also tried to promote the concept of addressing Eskom's lack of power security by self-generation across business in general. But of course, big industries like mining and manufacturing, of course, are in a position and use large amounts of power. If they could self-generate, they could certainly become part of the solution to reliability of supply regarding Eskom. That's one aspect. Of course, more recently, issues around carbon neutrality and climate change have become very dominant. In fact, probably more dominant than security of supply. And unless we get a good combination of renewable energies into our power grid, South Africa as a whole is going to suffer a credibility issue, especially in terms of exported products, where people in the rest of the world just won't buy dirty products, where the electricity or the power that's been used to make them is not green. So that's been an additional concern, which has arisen more recently. So the announcement by the president that the cap was being lifted effectively from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts was very meaningful and a step in the right direction.
So much so that the Mineral Council did say that prior to the announcement, there was about 30 billion rand worth of projects that were on the shelf. I'm just wondering now, post the announcement and also that cap being lifted beyond the industry's initial requests, how much of those projects, that 30 billion rand, were yours, and how much are now free to potentially find their way into South Africa's economy, Neal?
Yeah, so ours was a good portion of that. Ours was around 6 billion of that 30 billion. And certainly I know the other players in the industry that have got projects in the pipeline are really committed to becoming less dependent on Eskom, but also cleaning up their act when it comes to carbon emissions. So the other way to look at it is that there's about 5 gigawatts, that's 5,000 megawatts of projects that are in the pipeline that under the right conditions would come to fruition, which is your 30 billion rand. So it's a meaningful amount of electricity.
So just speaking broadly about what else needs to change, because as my producer rightly put it in the introduction, I mean, the mining industry has been the saving grace for South Africa, helping to narrow the then expected budget shortfall. But what hasn't changed or hasn't changed at an ideal pace is the level of private sector investments in the mining industry. And I know that there are still a host of other issues that the industry is worried about before freeing further capital. So just talk to us about those, perhaps the top ones that are still bugging you in terms of creating a more enabling environment that is conducive for investments.
Yes, as I said, this was one step in the right direction. But I think also to put it in perspective and not to, let's say, be over optimistic, there's still a lot of red tape involved with the renewable energy side and self-generation. So I think for everybody out there, this is not a silver bullet. It's a portion of a silver bullet. Now, in terms of, there's still, as you said, 30 billion rand that needs to be invested, and to invest money, you need the right investment conditions, and in other words, you want to invest a friendly environment. In mining, what that really means is we need certain issues resolved regarding the charter. One of them is renewals of mining licenses, and that's a critical issue. I think labor flexibility is another one, and some of those issues have been addressed. So there is a slow movement towards addressing these issues, but it's actually taking too long. We should not have taken a year or 2 years to lift the cap. It's an obvious thing to do, and business is part of the solution. So there are still a number of outstanding issues that you need to, when you invest money, also consider. Redistribution of land is understood in the historical context, but when you add the word expropriation without compensation, what message are you sending investors? So we need to get our language right. We know what we're trying to achieve as a country, but we do it in the wrong way.
I mean, I imagine that COVID-19 could have partly been responsible for the delay in some of those areas that you do cite. And I just wonder, now that we are in what many are calling the thick of the third wave, and we're anticipating an announcement from the president later on today regarding that, what the possibility of tighter lockdown restrictions at this stage of the game could mean for your business.
Yeah, so I think this is where our minister has been very good at working with the industry. And if we look back now, we have a very good track record as the mining industry. In fact, the prevalence of COVID-19 in the mining industry was 1/3 of that in the communities, which meant that the lockdown protocols that were agreed between the industry and the DMRE were very effective. And therefore, I think further lockdowns should not have a direct impact, although they're uncomfortable for all of us. I think the fact that we make up so much now of GDP, and in our minister's own words, his portfolio is recognized as a significant portfolio in the cabinet now. But with the good track record, the looking after of our employees, 1/3 of the prevalence rate compared to our communities is a very good sign that we should be allowed to operate as long as we do it under the existing protocols.
Right, and on the tail end of that, I mean, COVID-19 lockdowns around the world have given a nice bump and boost to the commodities price complex. And perhaps it's this boost that has perhaps delayed some form of consolidation in the industry that should have happened, that now is not happening because the favorable pricing environment is providing a nice cushion for many companies to stand alone, at least for now. Going to my next question around your thoughts of creating this gold mining champion, this gold mining African champion. It has been a couple of months since you first dropped that statement. A bit uncomfortable for certain players, for instance, Anglo Gold or even Goldfields, given the lack of comment that we have seen from them to your idea. But can you give us an update on what has happened since regarding creating this African champion that would house 3 umbrellas, the 2 that I have mentioned, including yourself?
Yes, and we floated an idea which really would create a national South African precious metals champion, and it's really based on we are scouting the rest of the world, including South Africa, for good gold mining companies to pull in under our umbrella. I think what actually happened is you would have seen inflation started rearing its head, and rightly or wrongly, investors piled into gold, and you saw the gold price go up from something in the $1,700 an ounce up to almost 2,000. That impacted valuations, and unfortunately, at those levels at this point in time, we don't see any value in pursuing that strategy at this point in time. Doesn't mean we won't consider it in future, but right now there's no value in that sector as far as we can see.
All right, a very interesting comment there. And of course, we will be watching closely for a potential change in tone in future. But Neal, thanks so much for your time. Just one last question. For our viewers who have been watching this interview wondering why is Mr. Froneman standing with a hand behind him saying no to stop gender-based violence, just briefly talk to us about the company's positioning thereof.
Yes, certainly. Gender diversity is something that I championed together with one of the other vice presidents at the Minerals Council. We took it back to Sibanye-Stillwater, and it morphed from a gender diversity initiative to an inclusivity initiative, but also as part of gender diversity, there was a national launch of stopping gender-based violence, and we know that it was very much a significant issue in the lockdown, and we've embarked on that, and we fly that flag as a company. It's a very meaningful initiative in our company, and it's about stopping gender-based violence.
Mm-hmm.